Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, a rich businessman built a wall through my farmland and claims he owns half of my property. Here is what happens when you fight with a farmer. Let's dive right in. A few years ago, my wife received news that her parents had a terrible accident while returning from a relative's place. We lived in a small village in South America where we relied on our farm and barns for money. When we heard about the accident, we hurried back to their place, which was a good 6 hours away. We packed only the important stuff and drove to the hospital where they were taken. You might be wondering why exactly all of this matters, so let me tell you something. During the time when we were away to go check up on my in-laws, a rich and spoiled businessman started taking over our farmland. I found out about it from my friend who lived nearby. According to what he saw, the businessman was putting up fences that went right through our land. When my friend tried to stop him, the businessman said that half of the land actually belonged to him. It was a complete lie, but my friend could not do much about it, and honestly, I could not either because my in-laws were in critical condition. As much as the land meant to us, I could not abandon my wife. So I tried to contact the local authorities and file a complaint. As the days went by in a blurry whirlwind, I focused all my energy on taking care of my wife who had lost all hope for her parents' recovery. I barely had a moment to think about the arrogant businessman or the authorities I had contacted. But when we received word that my in-laws were in a somewhat stable condition, I decided to give the police officer a call. To my surprise, instead of any good news, the officer informed me that the businessman had some papers that supposedly proved he owned half of our land, but I knew deep down those papers had to be fake. I asked the officer to investigate, but he responded rudely, saying I needed to come to the station in person if I wanted them to look into it. It made no sense to me. Our local authorities were usually understanding and knew us farmers well, but this officer refused to listen even when I explained my situation. Eventually, he just hung up on me and would not pick up when I called back. I started feeling anxious about our land. I reached out to my friend who told me that in just a few days the businessman had managed to complete half of the fence wall he was building around and through our property. It was a lot considering how big our farm was. My friend urged me to come back immediately, but when I explained that I couldn't leave my wife's side, he promised to gather as much evidence as he could. Even though this businessman might be someone from the outside and knew little to nothing about us, the workers he had hired for constructing the fence wall were from our village, and my friend thought that he could probably find out some info from them since they knew me. I thanked him and ended the call, returning to care for my wife, my mind filled with worry and uncertainty. After hearing that her parents were stable, my wife noticed how worried I looked. When she asked me about it, I could not hide the truth. I told her to focus on her parents and not worry about our land problems. When she asked me about it, I could not hide the truth. I told her to focus on her parents and not worry about our land problems. But being herself, she insisted that I go back and reclaim our livelihood from the sneaky businessman. At first, I refused, knowing how emotional she could get, but she made a convincing argument that if I did not act soon, we could lose everything. So, with a promise to return in a few days, I headed back to our property. When I arrived, I saw exactly what my friend had described: a fence cutting through my land with workers finishing the last part of it. The businessman, or the only man wearing an extravagant suit in the hot weather, was there too. I confronted him and asked why he was doing this. He arrogantly claimed that half the land belonged to him and showed me some papers as proof. I called him out on his lies and warned him to remove the fences or face police investigation. He pushed me and mocked me, saying that I was a nobody and the police would not help me. I almost got into a fight with this henchman, but my friend arrived in time and stopped me. He dragged me to our house even as I screamed to show this stupid businessman his place. Inside, my friend told me what he had learned. Apparently, the businessman was from the city where his business was slowly going into bankruptcy. He had actually bought a piece of land, the one next to mine, which made us neighbors, but he wanted a bigger plot for himself, so his genius mind came up with the idea of snatching up my fertile piece of land and combining it with his own, and for that he forged some fake documents. He also hired locals to work the land, but at such a low pay that it was basically nothing compared to the hours they had to work. This jerk of a businessman was basically taking advantage of the poor who either had no one else to turn to or had the responsibility of the entire family on their shoulders. He even bribed the authorities so they would not interfere with his plans. I was furious hearing all of this. As we discussed our next move, we heard a knock on the door. My friend told me to wait and be careful. I did not understand what he was trying to do until I heard shouts coming from the outside, people shouting at me, yelling at me to back off and silently keep half of the land, or they would make sure to leave me in such a state that I won't be able to tend to the other half left. We heard loud bangs and commotions outside and waited silently with a shotgun I had for times like this. I peeked out to see that my property had been trashed. I knew I had to do something because this businessman would clearly not stop at only half the land, and I did not want to live in the fear. So at my friend's suggestion, I decided to leave for my wife's house at the first rays of the sun. There was no way for me to win through physical altercation, so I had to use my mind. This haughty businessman did not know that farmers like us, while we may not be the richest, but we had some serious connections. When I returned to my wife after just one day, she obviously had questions. I chose to be honest with her, knowing that hiding the truth would only cause her more worry in the long run. I explained everything, including my plan to fight this battle legally. It really seemed like the only way to drive that despicable businessman away. I had to leave for the city, where I knew a few people who could help me with the case. I was confident that this businessman had not expected me to take legal action in such a way. He probably thought I would be stuck in a local court battle with the authorities, but he was in for a surprise. With the help of my friend from the city and a few others, we gathered evidence and built a strong case against him. We sent a legal notice to the businessman, who showed up with his lawyer, looking quite annoyed that a nobody like me had the power to drag him to court. From that point on, the battle became mostly straightforward. Legal battles are often long and complex, but we had all the evidence on our side. The businessman, on the other hand, had nothing but forged papers and authorities he had corrupted. However, as the case went on, his lies were exposed. Throughout this time, my in-laws were doing well again, so I was not overly worried about my wife. Still, I made every effort to meet with her as often as possible, but finally, we won the case. The businessman was not only sent to prison, but also fined for his actions. As a final blow, I made the decision to have the wall he had built demolished. However, I decided to keep the materials involved as a symbolic gesture, a way of saying F you to the businessman who had tried to steal my property. And yeah, Ripe stars, honestly, what is it with these business people, usually from big cities, coming to the rural countryside and deciding to mess with farmers? I mean, not only at some point should they learn their lesson, but also why are they so obsessed with stealing property from people living in rural areas? This sense of entitlement is just despicable, honestly. Anyway, if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment, because that would help me tremendously. The next one is titled "Getting Fired for Doing My Job," posted by user namelesshenchman02 on r/ripe stories on Reddit. And by the way, if you have an interesting story to share, then please head over to r/ripe stories on Reddit, which is our own subreddit, and you can post your own story there, and there's a good chance that I will read it in a video if it is interesting enough. Anyway, I work security in one of 4 buildings, with a convention hall, a business conference building, and a theater building. The theater building is almost 100 years old, plus riddled with backstage access passages. It is supposedly haunted, but that's fine with me, because I worked in a professional haunted house for 7 years. Besides, it's the only building with a full break room that has a fridge and coffee maker, if you don't mind going through the pitch dark black halls with a wall-rattling boiler system. I'm an overnight guard, so I usually just deal with hobos, junkies, and our usual neighborhood oddballs. It's part of my job to open doors and turn on the elevators for any events or shows moving into any of the 4 parts of the building. My night had been quiet until that morning, when my few openings turned into a full building opening with floor access to all the elevators. Now, there are very few windows in this building, with most in the back of the buildings for all 7 floors. This will be important. I'm coming up from the final openings for the event hall in the basement. I get a lot of walking in to go to the access that will take me back to the security office. In front of the building, there's a fully lit up fire truck with the firefighters already climbing back in the truck to leave. Standard procedure is to call our desk officer, person responsible for monitoring cameras and dispatching, to inform them of the emergency services being on property for liability purposes. I call over the radio to inform the desk officer, because the last thing I want to do is turn into Kentucky Fried Security. There was no answer after a couple of radio calls, so I whipped out my cell phone to call the security office directly as the truck drove away. I hear the rest of my team on the speakerphone as it was time to change shifts and I was behind with all the openings. I can hear my Lieutenant Lazy, who never leaves the office if they can help it, with them. Imagine my surprise when they tell me that the fire department had called us to tell the security office to disregard their presence because they had not found anything. Turned out, checking cameras later after I had left for the weekend, that a cross-dressing disguised hobo had tossed a Molotov down the stairs for the fire exit in the parking garage. It's all cement, so nothing was damaged, it was just smoky. Well, if the fire department themselves had told us it's all good, then I'm not gonna give it any concern, so I go back to the office, clock out and go home to enjoy my weekend away from the crazy. When I come back, the first thing that greets my face is one cheerfully written write-up by the captain for the entire team, sans one Lieutenant Lazy. I am a rather passive person and usually I try to do the best at any job I do because it makes me feel good. So this was an absolute outrage. I was being written up for not calling the desk officer to tell them that there was a fire truck on the property, with the addition that no one had told LT Lazy, who was again inside the office listening to the speaker call. I handed the paper back to LT Lazy with my usual cheery smile and stated, "Absolutely not. I did my job, so I will sign my last will and testament before I sign this paper." They did not like this answer, and the next night I get to see my new paper buddy in LT Lazy's hand once more with an insistence from Captain that I sign this. I grabbed the paper and with my favorite gel pen wrote in my swirly girly handwriting a refusal to compliance along with the date. Thinking that I had signed the paper, LT Lazy smirked and thanked me for not making such a big deal. Oh, how wrong they were. It was only a few days later before the Three Stooges figured out that it was not my signature and cue my due diligence. On my night as the desk officer, I pulled up every camera that I knew covered that area and began snapping pictures on my phone. I meticulously made sure that each one had the date, time, and myself and the fire truck in the shots. I had smelled this rotten business, as Captain and Mr. Trigger Happy does this to get anyone their Janice masked asses don't like fired. Captain seemed all too happy to tell me that I have a meeting with Mr. Trigger Happy and Captain at the head office. Now, Mr. Trigger Happy is Captain's manager, just for reference. I had already gone to HR with a rebuttal submission to the write-up, but once I heard that it was Mr. Trigger Happy's job to review my situation, well damn, I had not planned for that. Oh wait, I had. Forgive me, when my literal job is to be suspicious and I love problem solving. I had sent all my evidence with the rebuttal to a third-party workplace investigation company that was all too happy to jump at this case. Still figuring that I'm gonna get fired, but I lit a fuse on the way out that I had no idea to the size of the powder keg it led to. My roommate works at a different security post and he had apparently complained about my situation to the guards at his post. They were not happy either, with the most incensed being their equivalent of Mr. Trigger Happy, Super Karen. She has the hair, attitude, and she is a manager. So Super Karen tells my buddy to call me immediately with instructions that her and I were gonna have a meeting the very morning before the farce with the captain and Mr. Trigger Happy. I am now panicked that I'm about to get blacklisted from the company as I walk in. And damn, she gave me an immediate job interview to hire me on the spot. She pulls all her Karen powers to call up the full district manager with a near demand to transfer me to her team, as she had desperately needed an overnight desk officer. She then calls up Captain and Mr. Trigger Happy, who were also meeting with the HR manager at the time, to inform them that she had just poached me from them. And I belong with her team in 5 days. I was just in awe, as she had used her powers to fix the entire problem in 2 hours. I had to break my team's heart with the news because they were seriously awesome people except for Lieutenant Lazy. The morning before my last day, Captain comes to me holding up a brand new formal write-up from Mr. Trigger Happy. It now said that I was written up about not submitting a report about the incident, that I also needed to cease my inappropriate and childish behavior. I smiled with a glossy pink pen, putting refuse to sign once more to hand her a not so happy face. So then I go to my new post, and so far it's been awesome. Fast forward 4 months and I'm talking to one of my old post buddies who told me that all three stooges had gotten their comeuppance. Lieutenant Lazy had been demoted to floor guard, Captain had been removed from the post by the head of security, the contract manager, and Mr. Trigger Happy, also removed, was under investigation. In the meantime, Super Karen cling-wrapped someone's office chair in our current inter-office prank war, and we enjoy the baked goods the office people share with us. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing this hilarious, entertaining story with us on r/ripe stories. I always enjoy the stories you guys share with us. Either way, the next one is a petty revenge story. So I'm a commercial HVAC technician. I do a lot of my work on the school system in this one town. Everyone is generally pretty nice, some pain in the rear teachers here, some obnoxious administrators there, the usual. Except at the high school, there's one woman who gives me crap every time I'm there. She works the front security desk, which sits in this big lobby. Now, I'm at this school a lot and she has seen me literally hundreds of times. Yet, every time I walk up to the door, instead of just clicking the button to open it for me, she yells over the intercom, "I need to see identification." I always have to drop all the stuff I'm carrying and pull out my ID and show it to the little camera. Then she always gives me a bad attitude. By the way, this is not protocol. The principal said that I could just come in without showing ID since everyone there knows me. Well, yesterday I started the maintenance. I also just had my first kid, so I'm very sleep deprived. My arms were full and she pulls her usual crap. Sorry lady, not in the mood today. So after showing her my ID and her giving me the death stare, I immediately head up to the roof and shut down the AC unit that does that lobby. Whoops! After a couple of hours, it's now 85 degrees in there and the principal calls me to tell me that it's very hot in the lobby and Christine is very uncomfortable. I tell him I'll look into it. I come back down from the roof an hour later to tell him that the unit seems to be working intermittently and I'll try to figure out what's going on while I do the maintenance. So for the next 2 weeks while I do the maintenance, I'll be turning her unit off while I'm there and back on overnight. And by the way, I'll be sure to give her a nice big smile every time I walk in. Enjoy the heat, Christine. And the next one is an Am I the Jerk story about a special needs kid. It starts like this. Myself, 43 male, and my wife, 41 female, have lived on our street for years with our 2 boys, James, 12 male, and Sam, 6 male. Every Saturday morning, Sam and I have a ritual. He calls them our dude walks. We look for spiders, dig in the mud, and stop at our neighborhood park to play. It is sort of a standing meetup for a bunch of parents in the area. Recently, a new family moved in the next block over. The mother mentioned that she had 2 boys too, Kyle 13 male and Aiden 7 male. I told her about the Saturday morning park group in case she wanted to meet some neighbors. When she showed up with Aiden, it was clear that he has special needs. The mom was friendly, she sat with all the parents while the kids played. Aiden is an enthusiastic player, loud noises banging on things getting up in other kids' faces. The mom was good about correcting him and he was not aggressive, just excited. The other kids are wary when he flails, but they include him in the play still. So one Saturday, he was having an especially tough day. I called Sam over for a snack. He said, "I don't want to play with Aiden, can we go home?" So we left. The next day, Aiden's mom came to my door. She told me that I should have talked to him about differently abled people instead of just abandoning her son. We agreed to talk to Sam. The next weekend, Sam said hi to Aiden. They played together a bit, but when Aiden got loud again, Sam retreated to the highest platform where Aiden was scared to go. When Aiden asked him to be his partner for a game, Sam said no thank you. I felt that was fine. My wife still felt bad, so she invited them over. Aiden had one meltdown, but other than that, it went fine. Afterwards, Sam asked please could Aiden not come over again. I asked James what he thought of Kyle. He said that the kid was obnoxious and did not smell great. The next weekend, Aiden destroyed my son's favorite toy. He snapped the arms and legs off. Sam yelled, "You're a very mean little boy," and I did not make him apologize, we just left. So now, instead of going out in the morning, we go on Saturday afternoon after Aiden has left the park. After a few weeks, some others started joining us. We did not discuss why. But I suspect that they did not all shift their weekend routine around solely because they missed my sparkling personality. Aiden's mom eventually got wind of it, I don't know how. She wrote us a long heartfelt letter. She felt I had not done enough to discourage Sam from ostracizing Aiden and that my pull in the neighborhood was influencing others to avoid her son now too. Sam had tried his best. He has verbalized his need for boundaries from Aiden to us 3 times now. James has also been clear that he does not like the brother Kyle. As long as both of my kids treat them with respect, I am satisfied. I cannot control what the other parents chose to do. We'll continue to be friendly and be good neighbors if they need a hand, but not play with them. And yeah, Ripe Stars, do you think that OP is the a-hole for doing this or not? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm very curious about what you have to say. Comment number 1 on Reddit said, "Not the a-hole. Your job is to make sure your kid treats Aiden with respect, but not to force him to be Aiden's friend. You did just fine." Comment number 2, not the a-hole. It's a very difficult situation, but you're doing the right thing in prioritizing your child and their enjoyment of the time you share together. You gave their friendship multiple chances to develop, but you cannot expect a 6-year-old to have that much tolerance, and your 12-year-old is old enough to choose who he is friends with. You sound like a decent father, and it seems like you approached this in the right way. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.